20 below, and the wind had teeth. Colton Hayes pushed open the barn door, frozen hinges screaming in the dark. His breath fogged in the lantern light. The smell of horse sweat and grain dust hung heavy in the cold air. Then he saw them. Two little girls, maybe 8 years old, crouched by the feed bins. One clutched a burlap sack of oats, the other had shoved grain into her dress pockets, hands shaking so bad she kept dropping it. They froze when the light hit their faces. Dirt smudged their cheeks, their lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. The taller one, red curls poking out from under a torn scarf, stepped in front of her sister. Her voice came out barely a whisper. "Please, don't tell Uncle Silas. He said if we eat his food again, he'll put us on the orphan train." The smaller girl swayed. Her eyes rolled back. She hit the ground before Colton could move. Outside, hoofbeats crunched through the snow. Colton dropped the lantern hook and lunged forward. He caught the little one before her head cracked against the frozen dirt. She weighed nothing, just bones and threadbare cotton. "Rose!" The other girl fell to her knees beside them. "Rose, wake up!" "She's breathing." Colton pressed his palm to the child's forehead, cold as creek ice. "When'd she last eat?" 3 days, the red-haired girl's voice broke. "Uncle said we didn't earn supper, said we were thieves." Colton looked at the burlap sack. Horse feed. They'd been eating horse feed. "Get up." He shifted the unconscious child into his arms. "Both of you, inside, now." "But Uncle—" "Ain't here yet." Colton's boots crunched across the frozen ground toward the house. "Move!" The girl hesitated, then grabbed the grain sack and followed. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. Colton laid the little one on the worn sofa near the hearth and threw 2 logs onto the embers. Smoke curled up, then flames caught. The smell of pine sap filled the room. "What's your name?" He pulled a wool blanket from the back of a chair. "Ruby." She was staring at her sister, hands twisting in that expensive scarf around her neck. Didn't match the rest of her. That scarf had silver thread worked into the edges. Cost more than these girls should have had. "She's Rose. We're twins." "I can see that." Colton tucked the blanket around Rose. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Ruby, there's milk in the cold box. Bread in the tin on the counter. Get it." She didn't move. "I ain't gonna hurt you." He met her eyes. Brown eyes. Too old for 8 years. "But your sister needs food. Real food, not horse grain." Ruby's chin trembled. Then she ran for the kitchen. Colton knelt beside the sofa. Rose's breathing was shallow. Her hands were red and raw from the cold. Frostbite starting on the fingertips. 5 years ago, he'd knelt like this beside another small body. His son. 3 years old. Born too early, lungs too weak. Catherine had held the baby for 6 hours before he stopped breathing. She'd followed him 2 weeks later. Heart gave out from the grief, the doctor said. Colton's hands remembered. Remembered warming cold skin. Remembered praying to a God who didn't answer. He shook his head. Not now. Ruby returned with a tin cup of milk and half a loaf. Her hands shook so bad the milk sloshed over the rim. "Give it here." Colton took the cup and lifted Rose's head. "Rose, wake up now. You got a drink." The girl's eyes opened, unfocused, glassy. "That's it." He tipped the cup to her lips. "Slow. Don't gulp." She drank like she was drowning. Milk ran down her chin. When the cup was empty, she started crying, silent, shaking sobs that made no sound. "Shh." Colton didn't know what else to do, so he broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her. "Easy. Your stomach ain't used to it." Ruby had already eaten half the loaf. She saw him looking and froze, guilt written across her face. "Finish it," Colton said. "There's more." "There is?" "Yeah." He stood and moved to the window. Through the frost on the glass, he could see a rider coming up the road, lantern swinging, moving fast. "That your uncle?" Ruby's face went white. "He'll be angry. He said we stole from him. He said—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He killed Papa. I heard him tell someone. He pushed Papa off the cliff and made it look like an accident." Colton's blood went cold. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Ruby's hands were shaking again. "And now he wants to put us on the orphan train so we can't tell anyone." The hoofbeats stopped outside. Boots hit the porch. 3 sharp knocks on the door. "Hayes," a man's voice. Deep, authoritative. "It's Marshal Garrett. Open up." Not the uncle, the law. Colton looked at the 2 girls on his sofa. Rose was still crying silently, clutching the bread like it might disappear. Ruby had moved in front of her sister again, small shoulders squared. He thought about Catherine. About the baby they'd lost. About 5 years of eating Christmas dinner alone at this table. About how some things are worth more than staying out of trouble. "Stay here," he told the girls. "Don't say nothing unless I tell you to." He opened the door. Marshal Wade Garrett stood on the porch, snow dusting his hat. Behind him, the wind howled through the bare cottonwoods. He held up a folded paper, candlelight catching the blood-red wax seal. "Got a problem, Hayes." The marshal's face was grim. "You're harboring wards of Silas Moreland, and he's coming to collect what's his in 3 days. Colton didn't step aside. "They're children, Wade. Starving children. They're legal wards." The marshal shifted his weight, his breath fogged in the cold. "Silas filed guardianship papers 2 weeks ago. Judge Harmon signed them." Judge Harmon. Colton spat the name like it tasted bad. "The same judge who plays poker with Silas every Thursday? Don't matter who he plays cards with. Papers are legal." Wade pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Look, I don't like it either. But the law says blood kin has first claim, and Silas is their uncle. Their uncle who hasn't fed them in 3 days. You got proof of that?" Colton stepped back and gestured at the sofa. Ruby had wrapped herself around Rose, both of them watching with wide, terrified eyes. Wade's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty in 30 years as marshal, but the sight of those 2 girls, hollow-cheeked, dirt-smudged, trembling, hit him like a fist. "Hell." He looked away. "When's the last time they ate?" "They were stealing horse feed when I found them," Colton said quietly. "Horse feed, Wade." The marshal was silent for a long moment. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The smell of wood smoke and warm bread filled the space between them. "I'll talk to Silas," Wade finally said. "But Hayes, you can't keep them. Not without his permission. 3 days, that's all I can give you." He turned and walked back into the snow. Colton closed the door and leaned against it. Ruby was still staring at him. "Are you going to make us go back?" Her voice was barely audible. "Not tonight." He moved to the fire and added another log. Sparks flew up the chimney. "Tonight, you sleep somewhere warm. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." But tomorrow came faster than he wanted. By mid-morning, half of the town knew. Colton could feel it when he rode into Salvation Creek with the girls bundled in the wagon bed under blankets. Eyes followed them down the muddy street. Whispers carried on the cold wind. He pulled up outside Connie Blackwell's general store. The building leaned slightly to the left, whitewashed boards weathered gray. Bell above the door jangled when he pushed it open. Connie looked up from her ledger, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on her nose. 50-something, gray streaking through her dark hair, hands stained with ink. She'd run this store alone since her husband died 10 years back. "Colton." Her eyes flicked to the girls behind him. "Heard you had company. Need some clothes and boots." He nodded at Ruby and Rose. They were still wearing thin dresses, no coats. Rose's feet were wrapped in rags. "Whatever you got, that'll fit." Connie came around the counter. She knelt in front of the girls, studying them with the careful eye of a woman who'd raised 4 children before burying 2. "You're the Bennett twins. It wasn't a question. I remember your mother. She used to buy fabric here. Had beautiful handwriting." Ruby's hand went to her scarf. "You knew Mama?" "I did." Connie stood and moved to a shelf stacked with folded clothes. "She was kind, and she loved you girls more than anything." "She died when we were born," Rose whispered. It was the first time Colton had heard her speak. Her voice was soft, like she was afraid of breaking something. "I know, honey." Connie pulled down 2 dresses, heavy wool, dark blue, "but that don't mean she stopped loving you." The bell jangled again. Cold air rushed in. Silas Moreland filled the doorway. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, wearing a wool coat that cost more than most men in Salvation Creek made in a month. His face was clean-shaven, handsome in a hard way. Banker's hands, smooth and uncalloused. And on his finger, a gold ring with a blood-red stone. Behind him stood 2 men Colton didn't recognize. Hired muscle by the look of them, guns on their hips. "Mr. Hayes," Silas's voice was smooth as whiskey, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ruby grabbed Colton's arm. Her fingernails dug in through his coat sleeve. "These girls don't belong to anybody," Colton said evenly. "They're children, not property. Legally, they're my wards." Silas pulled a folded document from his coat. The same blood-red wax seal Colton had seen on the marshal's papers. "Signed by Judge Harmon, witnessed by 2 upstanding citizens of this town." "Upstanding." Connie's voice was sharp. "That what we're calling your poker buddies now?" Silas smiled. but it didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Blackwell, always a pleasure. He unfolded the document and held it up. Guardianship papers, legal and binding. The girls come with me. Today. No. Rose's voice was small but clear. She stepped forward, past Colton, past Ruby. You killed Papa. I heard you. The store went dead silent. Silas's smile never wavered. Children have such active imaginations. Your father fell from a cliff, sweetheart. A tragic accident. I mourned him deeply. You pushed him. Rose's hands were shaking, but she didn't back down. I heard you telling someone. You said he shouldn't have tried to change the claim papers. For just a second, something flickered across Silas's face. Anger, fear, then it was gone, smoothed over like he'd never felt anything at all. The girl is confused. Grief does that. He looked at Colton. I'll be back tomorrow with the marshal, and you'll hand them over, or you'll be arrested for kidnapping. He turned and walked out. His hired men followed. The bell jangled one last time. Then silence, except for the wind outside and the crackling of the wood stove in the corner. Connie was staring at Rose. Claim papers? What claim papers? I don't know. Rose looked up at Colton, tears streaming down her face. I just know Papa was angry about something Uncle Silas wanted him to sign, and then Papa died. Colton felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, something harder. He looked at Connie. You knew their mother. Did she leave a will? If she did, it'd be filed at the county seat, or... Connie paused. Father Miguel was here when she died. He might have kept church records. Where's Miguel now? Circuit preacher. Could be anywhere between here and Fort Laramie. Connie crossed her arms. But Colton, even if you find a will, Silas has Judge Harmon in his pocket. Legal or not, he'll get those girls unless... The door opened again. Father Miguel stepped inside, snow dusting his black coat. Unless someone fights him, the priest said quietly. And I believe that's exactly what we're going to do. Father Miguel Santos shook the snow from his shoulders and closed the door. He was older than Colton remembered, maybe 60 now, with silver threading through his dark hair. His face was weathered from years riding circuit through Wyoming territory, but his eyes were sharp. I heard about the girls. He moved to the wood stove and held his hands over it. The smell of wet wool and horse sweat came off him in waves. Rode through the night when Marshal Garrett told me. You know Silas has legal papers, Colton said. I know a lot of things about Silas Moreland. Miguel turned to face them, including the fact that those guardianship papers are a lie. Ruby's head snapped up. You can prove it? Not yet. The priest pulled off his gloves, fingers red from the cold. But I baptized your mother, child. Eleanor Rose Bennett. I remember her handwriting, her voice, the way she prayed. He looked at Rose. You have her eyes. Rose touched her face, like she could feel her mother there. Eleanor registered her will with the church in 1884, Miguel continued. Not with the county. She didn't trust the local judge, said he was in too many pockets. Smart woman. He paused. If that will still exist, it might name a guardian for you girls, someone other than Silas. Where would it be? Connie asked. County seat, St. Catherine's Parish, 80 miles north. Miguel's jaw tightened. I need to ride there and search the records, but in this weather it'll take 2 weeks, maybe more. Silas is coming back tomorrow, Colton said flatly. Then we buy time. Miguel looked at him. You're willing to keep them, even if it means trouble? Colton thought about the empty house he'd been living in for 5 years, about Catherine's chair by the fire that nobody sat in anymore, about the sound of children's voices filling rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Yeah, he said. I'm willing. Good, Miguel nodded. Then I ride at first light. You keep them safe until I get back. And if Silas shows up with the marshal? Tell Wade Garrett that you're contesting the guardianship on grounds of suspected fraud and child endangerment. It won't hold long, but it might hold long enough. Connie cleared her throat. Those girls need proper clothes and hot meals. I'll extend credit, Colton. Pay me when you can. I can't. You can, and you will. She was already wrapping the wool dresses in brown paper, and if Silas Moreland has a problem with it, he can take it up with me. Outside, boots thumped on the porch. The door swung open. Marshal Garrett stood there, hat in hand. Behind him, the street was filling with townspeople. Word had spread fast. Need to talk to you, Hayes. Wade's voice was careful. Outside. Colton glanced at the girls. Ruby had moved close to Father Miguel, one hand clutching his coat sleeve. Rose stood very still, watching everything with those old eyes. "Stay here," Colton told them. Then to Miguel, "Don't let them out of your sight." On the porch, the wind bit through Colton's shirt. He could see faces in the crowd, some sympathetic, some hard. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, Tom Wheeler, who ran the livery, Sarah Chin, the schoolteacher, all watching. "Silas filed a formal complaint," Wade said quietly. "Claims you took the girls without permission, says they're confused about their father's death, grief talking. Judge Harmon wants them returned to their legal guardian by sundown tomorrow. Their legal guardian is trying to starve them. So you say." Wade held up a hand before Colton could argue. "I believe you. I do. But belief ain't evidence. And Silas has papers. You got anything besides two scared little girls saying things that sound like nightmares?" Colton was quiet for a moment. In the general store window, he could see Ruby and Rose standing close together. Miguel's hand rested on Ruby's shoulder. "Father Miguel is riding to the county seat," Colton said. "Says there might be a will, one that names a different guardian." Wade's eyebrows went up. "Might be? It's something. It's a maybe. And Silas has a signed document from a territorial judge." The marshal put his hat back on. "I'm giving you till Sunday. That's 3 days. If Miguel don't come back with proof, I got no choice but to enforce the judge's order. And if Silas comes for them before then you better hope you got a good reason to say no." Wade started down the steps, then stopped. "Colton, be careful. Silas Moreland don't play fair, and he's got resources you don't." The marshal walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Colton went back inside. The warmth of the store hit him like a wall. Rose and Ruby were still standing by Miguel, but now Connie had given them each a piece of hard candy. Rose was turning hers over in her hand, not eating it, just looking at it like she wasn't sure it was real. "Sunday," Miguel said. It wasn't a question. "Sunday," Colton confirmed. The priest nodded slowly. "Then we pray, I find what we need." He knelt in front of the girls, eye level with them. "I'm going to be gone for a little while, but Mr. Hayes is going to keep you safe. You understand?" Ruby nodded. Rose just stared at him. "Good," Miguel stood. "There's one more thing. Before I go, I'd like to do what your mother would have wanted." He pulled a small wrapped loaf from his saddlebag. The smell of fresh-baked bread filled the store. A blessing, the way she used to do it. He broke the bread carefully, steam rising in the cold air. Then he began to pray. Rose's lips moved, whispering something. Miguel stopped mid-prayer. He stared at her. "What did you say, child?" Rose looked up, eyes wide. "It's Mama's prayer, the one she taught us before she died. That's what you're saying." Miguel's hands trembled. "Say it with me." And Rose did, word for word. Her small voice joined his, reciting a prayer Miguel hadn't heard in 9 years. When they finished, the priest crossed himself. "I baptized your mother," he said softly. "And I remember that prayer. She wrote it in the church ledger herself." He looked at Colton. "If she wrote that prayer, she wrote other things too. A will. I'm sure of it now." He turned and walked out into the snow. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Colton hadn't known in 5 years. Morning started before dawn. He'd wake to find Ruby already dressed, standing by the window, watching for the sun. Rose took longer, curling deeper into the blankets like she was afraid the warmth would disappear. He taught them the work, not because he needed the help, but because idle hands gave fear too much room to grow. "Ice don't break itself," he told them that first morning, handing Ruby the iron mallet. "You gotta show up every day, no matter how cold it gets." The water troughs had frozen solid overnight. 20 below, maybe colder. The kind of cold that made your teeth ache and turned breath to ice crystals in the air. Ruby swung the mallet. It bounced off the ice with a dull thunk. She tried again, and again. Her arms shook from the effort. "Let me." Colton took the mallet and brought it down hard. The ice cracked. Once more, and chunks broke free, revealing dark water beneath. "See? You keep hitting the same spot. Eventually it breaks." "What if it don't?" Rose asked quietly. She was watching from the barn door, wrapped in one of Catherine's old shawls. "Then you keep swinging." Colton handed the mallet back to Ruby. "Because if the cattle can't drink, they die. And if the cattle die, we don't eat. That's ranch work. You show up even when it's hard." Ruby nodded slowly. She took the mallet and swung again. This time, a small crack appeared. "That's it." Colton moved to the next trough. "Every morning, you and me. Deal?" "Deal." Ruby said. By the third morning, both girls were swinging the mallet. Rose was smaller, weaker, but she didn't quit, just kept hitting until the ice broke. Colton watched them and felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been frozen for 5 years. At night, they sat by the fire. He taught Rose to braid rope, showed Ruby how to read weather in the sky. Neither girl talked much about their father or their uncle, but sometimes, late when they thought he was asleep, he'd hear them whispering to each other in the dark. "You think Papa knows we're safe now?" Rose once asked. "I think so," Ruby whispered back. "I think Mama knows too." Sunday came too fast. Colton was in the barn, checking a loose hinge on the feedroom door, when he heard hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. He grabbed his rifle from the peg by the door and stepped outside. Silas Moreland sat astride a black gelding, expensive saddle gleaming even in the winter light. Behind him, 4 men, not the 2 hired guns from before, 4 new faces, hard men with rifles across their saddles, and behind them Marshal Garrett, face grim. "Hayes." Silas dismounted slowly, brushing dust from his coat. The smell of pomade and cigar smoke came off him. "I believe we had an agreement. 3 days, and here we are." "Father Miguel ain't back yet," Colton said evenly. "That's unfortunate." Silas pulled a paper from his coat, not the guardianship document, something else. "But I'm afraid your time is up. You see, I did some looking into your situation, and I discovered something interesting." He unfolded the paper, red wax seal at the bottom, fresh. "You owe $800 on this ranch. Mortgage taken out 6 years ago, payments current until last month." Silas smiled. "But last month, you missed. And this month, that makes you 60 days delinquent." Colton's blood went cold. "I bought your note from the bank on Friday," Silas continued. "Paid full value for it, which means I now hold your mortgage. And according to territorial law, I can call the loan due immediately if the borrower is in arrears." He held up another document. This one had Judge Harmon's signature. "Foreclosure notice. Signed yesterday. You have 30 days to pay the full amount, $800, or this property becomes mine." Silas's smile widened. "Of course, I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to forgive the debt entirely, in exchange for one small thing." "The girls?" Colton said flatly. "The girls." Silas folded the papers carefully. "They're my bloodkin, Hayes, and you're nobody. A broke rancher about to lose everything. So, here's my offer. Give me Ruby and Rose right now, and I'll tear up this foreclosure notice. You keep your land, your home, everything." The hired men shifted in their saddles, hands resting near rifle stocks. Marshal Garrett cleared his throat. "Colton, I looked at the papers. They're legal. He can do this." "Of course I can." Silas's voice was smooth as silk. "And if you refuse, I'll be back in 30 days with a writ of possession. You'll be dragged off this land, and the girls will still come to me because I'm their legal guardian. The only difference is, you'll have nothing." From the house, Colton heard the door creak open. He didn't turn around, but he knew Ruby and Rose were watching. "So what's it going to be, Hayes?" Silas stepped closer. "Your pride or your land? Choose." The wind howled through the bare cottonwoods. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. The sound echoed across the frozen fields. Colton thought about Catherine, about the day they'd bought this land, how she'd stood right here, on this spot, and said, "This is where we'll build our life." He thought about the baby they'd buried in the spring, the tiny grave under the oak tree, marked with a wooden cross he'd carved himself. This land was all he had left of them. But then he looked at Ruby and Rose standing in the doorway, thin shoulders squared, holding each other's hands, and he knew some things were worth more than land. "No," Colton said quietly. Silas's smile vanished. "What?" "I said no." Colton lowered the rifle, but he didn't put it down. "You can have the land. Take it. But you ain't getting those girls." "You're making a mistake." "Maybe." Colton met his eyes. "But it's mine to make." For a long moment, Silas just stared at him. Then he laughed, a cold, hard sound that had nothing to do with humor. "You're a fool, Hayes. In 30 days, you'll be living in the mud with nothing, and I'll still have the girls." He mounted his horse. "Because the law is on my side. Judge Harmon, Marshal Garrett, every deed and document in this territory. You have nothing." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his hired men following. Snow kicked up behind them, swirling in the wind. Marshal Garrett stayed behind. He wouldn't look at Colton. I'm sorry, Wade said finally. I didn't know he'd bought your note. If I had, ain't your fault. Colton. The marshal finally met his eyes. You just lost your home for two little girls you barely know, and in 30 days, Silas is still going to take them. What was the point? Colton was quiet for a moment. Behind him, he heard small footsteps in the snow. Ruby and Rose had come down from the porch. They stood on either side of him, not touching, but close. Point is, Colton said slowly, when they're older, they'll remember a man who chose them. That's worth more than land. Wade shook his head. I hope you're right, because you just bet everything on it. He rode away. Colton stood there, watching him go. The cold bit through his coat. His hands ached from gripping the rifle. And somewhere deep in his chest, something hurt worse than cold ever could. He'd just lost Catherine's dream, the only piece of her he had left. Ruby's small hand slipped into his. I'm sorry, she whispered. You shouldn't have. We're not worth. Stop. Colton looked down at her, at Rose beside her, both girls crying silently. You're worth everything. Don't you ever think different. But as he said it, he wondered if he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. In the distance, dark clouds gathered, another storm coming, and Father Miguel still wasn't back. By Monday, the whole town knew. Colton felt it the moment he rode into Salvation Creek with the girls. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes tracked them down the muddy street. Mrs. Patterson pulled her daughters closer as they passed. Tom Wheeler, who'd always waved hello, turned his back and walked into the livery. Only Connie Blackwell stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching. Colton tied his horse to the rail and helped Ruby and Rose down from the wagon. The mud sucked at their boots. What little snow had fallen was already melting into brown slush. February thaw coming early. Inside the general store, 3 women clustered near the fabric bolts went silent. One of them, Margaret Foster, the mayor's wife, pursed her lips and walked past without speaking. Don't mind them, Connie said from behind the counter, but her voice was tight. They're just scared. Scared of what? Ruby asked quietly. Of crossing Silas Moreland. Connie closed her ledger with a sharp snap. Your uncle holds mortgages on half the businesses in this town, including apparently this one. Colton's head came up. Connie, found out this morning. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He bought the note from the bank Friday. Same day as yours, send his man around with a message. Anyone who helps you loses their credit. Anyone who shelters those girls loses their lease. The store suddenly felt smaller, colder. I'm sorry, Colton said. I didn't know he'd... I knew. Connie finally looked at him. I knew the minute I gave you credit for those dresses. But Colton, I lost 2 babies, buried them before they took their first breath. I look at Ruby and Rose, and I see... Her voice broke. I see what could have been, so Silas can take his threats and choke on them. She pulled a canvas sack from under the counter. Flour, salt, dried beans, a slab of bacon wrapped in paper. That's too much, Colton protested. It's enough for a week, maybe 2 if you stretch it. Connie pushed the sack across the counter. And before you argue, consider it a loan. You can pay me back when this is over. If it's ever over. It will be. She glanced at the women still standing by the fabric bolts, pretending not to listen. Now get out of here before Margaret runs to Silas with a full report. Outside, the wind had picked up. The smell of rain hung heavy in the air. Not snow this time, but cold February rain. The kind that soaked through wool and turned roads to mud. Colton loaded the supplies into the wagon. Ruby and Rose climbed up, silent. Mr. Hayes? Rose's voice was so quiet he almost missed it. Are people mad at us? No, honey. Colton swung up onto the seat. They're just scared. Fear makes people do things they ain't proud of. Uncle Silas makes everyone scared, Ruby said. Even Papa was scared of him. Colton flicked the reins. The horse started forward, hooves squelching through the mud. They were almost out of town when Sarah Chin stepped into the street. The school teacher was small, no more than 5 feet tall, with graying black hair pinned up tight. She'd taught in Salvation Creek for 15 years. Buried a husband and kept teaching. Everyone respected Sarah Chin. She walked right up to the wagon and looked at the twins. You're the Bennett girls. Not a question. Your mother was Eleanor Rose Bennett. She volunteered at the school before you were born, read to the younger children. Rose nodded slowly. I remember her voice. Sarah reached into her apron and pulled out 2 small books. Worn covers, pages dog-eared. She'd want you to keep learning, even now. She handed the books up. Ruby took them carefully, like they might break. Thank you, Ruby whispered. Sarah nodded. Then she looked at Colton. You're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. She turned and walked back toward the schoolhouse. Behind her, Colton saw faces in windows, watching, judging. But Sarah Chin had spoken, and in a town like Salvation Creek, that meant something. The ride home was quiet. Rain started halfway back, cold, steady, soaking everything. By the time they reached the ranch, Colton was shivering and the girls looked half-drowned. Inside, he got the fire going while they changed into dry clothes. The sound of rain on the tin roof filled the silence, the smell of wet wood and smoke. Mr. Hayes? Ruby stood in the doorway to the bedroom, holding something. We found this in the trunk. Is it okay if we look at it? She held up a leather-bound book, Catherine's Bible. Colton's throat tightened. He hadn't opened that Bible in 5 years. Couldn't bear to see Catherine's handwriting in the margins, her careful notes about passages she loved. Yeah, he managed. It's okay. Ruby opened it carefully. A piece of fabric fell out, the scarf she'd been wearing the night he found them, the expensive one with silver thread. That was in there? Colton asked. It was marking a page. Ruby picked up the scarf, fingers tracing the embroidered initials. R.B. Rose Bennett. That was Mama's name before she married Papa. She opened the Bible to the marked page. Inside, in careful handwriting, a note. To my daughters, Ruby and Rose. If you are reading this, I am with God, but I have made provisions for you. All documents are recorded at St. Catherine's Church, county seat, silver claim deed, partnership papers, my last will. Father Miguel Santos knows where to look. Trust him, and know that I loved you with every breath. ERB, March 1884. The room went dead quiet. Silver claim deed, Colton said slowly. Your father had a silver claim? I don't know. Ruby's voice shook. But Uncle Silas and Papa used to fight about money, about a mine. Papa said Uncle wanted to change something, make it all his, but Papa wouldn't let him. Rose looked up, eyes wide. And then Papa died. The rain hammered harder against the roof. Lightning flickered outside, turning the world white for a moment. Colton stared at the note in Ruby's hand. Partnership papers. A mine worth enough to kill for. And, suddenly, everything made terrible sense. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. Colton spent those days fixing what he could, mending fence posts, patching the barn roof where water leaked through. The girls stayed close, helping where they could. Ruby had a good hand with rope. Rose was patient, holding boards steady while he hammered. Nobody came to visit. The road turned to soup, mud so deep a wagon would bog down halfway. But Colton knew it wasn't just the weather keeping folks away. On the 4th day, the rain broke. Pale sunlight filtered through gray clouds. The smell of wet earth was everywhere, thick and rich. Colton was in the barn, mucking stalls, when he heard hoofbeats. He reached for the rifle, but stopped when he recognized the horse. Connie Blackwell's bay mare, picking its way carefully through the mud. Connie dismounted, boots squelching. Her dress was mud-splattered to the knee. She carried a leather satchel under one arm. Connie, Colton set down the pitchfork. You shouldn't be here. If Silas finds out, let him. She pushed past him into the barn, out of the drizzle that had started again. I found something you need to see. She opened the satchel and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. An invoice, corners torn, ink faded, but still legible. Found it in my old ledgers, from 1887. Your turn. She handed it to him. Look at the buyer's name. Colton tilted the paper toward the light coming through the barn door. Invoice, mining equipment, rope, timber supports, total $240. Purchased by James Bennett and Silas Moreland, partners. Silver claim registered as Bennett Moreland Mine, Section 14, Range 6. Partners, Colton said slowly. The girl's father and Silas were partners in a silver mine. Were. Connie pointed to a note scrawled at the bottom in different handwriting. See that? Added 3 weeks later. Full payment received. Buyer amended to S. Moreland only. Partnership dissolved per JB request. James Bennett wanted out. Looks like it. Connie's jaw was tight. And 2 weeks after that notation, James Bennett fell off a cliff. Died instantly, they said. No witnesses. The rain pattered on the roof. Somewhere outside, a cow lowed mournfully. How much is the claim worth? Colton asked. I don't know, but if Silas was willing to murder his partner for it... Connie didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. The barn door creaked open. Ruby and Rose stood there, soaked from the drizzle, eyes wide. "Uncle killed Papa for money?" Ruby's voice cracked. "For a mine?" Colton moved toward them, but Ruby stepped back, shaking her head. "No, I want to know. I want to know why Papa died." She looked at Connie. "How much money? How much was he worth?" Connie hesitated. Then, "If it's producing silver, could be anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, maybe more." Rose made a small sound. Ruby's hands clenched into fists. "He killed Papa for money," Ruby whispered. "And now he wants us gone so nobody can ask questions, so he can keep it all." "That's my guess," Connie said quietly. Hoofbeats again, multiple horses this time, moving fast despite the mud. Colton grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. Ruby and Rose pressed against him, one on each side. Father Miguel rode into the yard, his black coat streaming water, but he wasn't alone. Behind him a wagon rattled through the mud, driven by a thin man in spectacles. Miguel dismounted, nearly slipping in the muck. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were bright. "Found it," he said, breathless. "Found everything." The thin man climbed down from the wagon, clutching a leather case to his chest. He was young, maybe 30, with ink stains on his fingers. "This is Daniel Pierce," Miguel said. "County clerk. He's been keeping records at St. Catherine's for 8 years. Pierce nodded nervously. "Father Miguel came to us 5 days ago, asking about Eleanor Bennett. I remember the name. She registered several documents with the church in March 1884, right before the twins were born." He opened the case carefully, protecting the contents from the drizzle, pulled out 3 documents, each sealed with wax, not red, but white, church seals. "Her last will and testament," Pierce said, holding up the first, "naming Father Miguel Santos as executor and legal guardian of her daughters in the event of her husband's death." Colton felt his heart kick against his ribs. "The partnership agreement for the Bennett Moreland mine," Pierce continued, showing the second document. "Filed jointly by James Bennett and Silas Moreland in 1885. The claim was assessed last year at $40,000. Ruby grabbed Colton's arm. "40,000, she breathed. "And this." Pierce held up the third document, an amendment to the partnership, filed by James Bennett, alone, in August 1887. It states that in the event of his death, his 50% share of the mine transfers to his daughters, Ruby and Rose Bennett, held in trust until their 18th birthday. Silence. Just the sound of rain and breathing. "He changed it," Colton said slowly. "James changed the partnership so his daughters would inherit, and Silas found out." "And killed him," Connie finished. "Because if the girls inherit, Silas loses $20,000. Miguel crossed himself. "That's why he wants them on the orphan train. Once they're gone, scattered to who knows where, the claim defaults to the surviving partner, him." "But we have proof now," Pierce said. "The will is legal. The amendment is legal. Judge Harmon can't ignore this." Colton looked at the documents, then at Ruby and Rose. Both girls were staring at the papers like they held the answers to everything. "Can he?" Rose asked quietly. "Can the judge ignore it?" Miguel's face darkened. "If Silas gets to him first, he'll try." As if summoned by his name, a rider appeared at the edge of the property, one of Silas's hired men, sitting motionless in the rain, watching. The man turned his horse and rode away slowly, deliberately. "He knows," Connie whispered. "Silas knows we found something." Miguel's hand went to the cross around his neck. "Then we need to move fast, because he won't let us reach a courtroom with this evidence." In the distance, thunder rumbled. The storm wasn't over, it was just beginning. They didn't have long to wait. That night, Colton woke to the sound of horses. Not on the road, closer, circling the house. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. In the darkness, he could make out shapes. 4, maybe 5 riders. No lanterns, just shadows moving through the mud. "Ruby, Rose," he kept his voice low. "Get dressed, stay quiet." The girls were already awake, sitting up in their bed. Ruby's eyes were wide, but she didn't cry out, just nodded and reached for her boots. A torch flared in the darkness, then another. Colton's blood turned to ice. "The barn," he whispered. "They're going for the barn." He ran for the door, but he was too late. The first torch arced through the air, trailing sparks. It hit the barn roof and caught, dry hay inside, timber supports. Within seconds, flames crawled up the walls. The second torch followed. Then a third. Colton burst out onto the porch, rifle raised. "Get off my land!" The riders wheeled away, disappearing into the darkness. But the damage was done. The barn was burning, flames reaching toward the sky, lighting up the night. The smell of burning wood and hay choked the air. "The cattle!" Ruby ran past him, heading for the corral. "No!" Colton grabbed her arm. Too dangerous." But Rose was already moving, throwing open the corral gate. The cattle scattered, bellowing, running from the heat. One stumbled in the mud and went down hard. Colton ran for it, Ruby on his heels. Together they hauled the animal up, slapping its hindquarters until it lurched away from the flames. By the time they got back to the house, half the town had arrived. Tom Wheeler with his wagon, Sarah Chen with buckets, even Marshal Garrett, face grim in the firelight. "Bucket line," Wade shouted, "before it spreads to the house." They worked through the night, passing buckets of water from the well, throwing them on the barn, on the sparks that drifted toward the house. The mud made everything harder. People slipped, buckets spilled, but they kept going. Connie appeared beside Colton, face streaked with soot. "Silas did this." "You know he did." "Can't prove it." "Don't need to prove it. Everyone knows." She threw another bucket, water hissing against burning wood. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Colton didn't answer. He just kept throwing water. By dawn, the barn was gone. Nothing left but smoking timbers and a stone foundation. The house had survived, but just barely. Scorch marks blackened the east wall. The crowd began to disperse. Some offered quiet words of sympathy. Others just left, avoiding his eyes. Marshal Garrett stayed behind. "I'll ask around," Wade said. "See if anyone saw who did this, but Colton, I got to be honest. Even if we find them, Silas will have an alibi. He always does." "I know." Wade looked at the ruins of the barn, then back at Colton. "You're running out of time. 23 days until foreclosure. No barn, half your fencing burned. How are you going to make it?" Colton didn't have an answer. After Wade left, Colton sat on the porch steps with his head in his hands. The smell of smoke clung to everything. His eyes burned. His lungs ached. Ruby and Rose came and sat beside him. Neither spoke. They just sat there in the gray morning light, watching the smoke rise. "I'm sorry," Ruby finally whispered. "This is our fault. We should leave. Go with Uncle Silas, then he'll stop hurting you." "No." Colton's voice was rough. "That's what he wants, for you to feel guilty, to give up. But you're losing everything because of us." Colton looked at her, at Rose beside her, both girls exhausted, covered in soot, eyes red from smoke and tears. "I already lost everything once," he said quietly. 5 years ago, when my wife and son died. This land, this barn, it's just wood and dirt. But you two?" He shook his head. "You're alive. You're here. That's worth more than any barn." Rose leaned against his shoulder. "What do we do now?" Before Colton could answer, another horse came up the road. Father Miguel, riding hard, he dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. His face was ashen. "The county clerk's office," Miguel said, breathless. "It burned last night, same time as your barn." The world seemed to tilt. "The documents?" Colton asked, though he already knew. "Gone. All of them. The will, the partnership papers, the amendment, everything." Miguel sank onto the steps beside them. "Daniel Pierce barely got out alive. He's saying it was an accident. A lamp knocked over. But Colton, there were 2 fires. Yours and his. Same night. That's not coincidence." Silas covered his tracks, Connie said from the doorway. She'd stayed behind, helping to clean up. "He knew we found the evidence, so he destroyed it." "We still have our testimony," Miguel protested. "Pierce saw the documents. I saw them. We can testify in court." "Against Judge Harmon's original ruling?" Connie shook her head. "It'll be our word against Silas's lawyers, and we have no proof." Silence settled over them, heavy as smoke. "So that's it?" Ruby's voice was small. "Uncle wins?" Miguel closed his eyes. "I don't know, child. I don't know." Colton stared at the burned barn, at the scorched earth, at everything Silas Moreland had taken from him in the span of one night, and he felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, changing, hardening. He stood up slowly. "Connie," he said. "You still have that invoice? The one showing James Bennett bought mining equipment with Silas?" "Yes. Why?" "Because that proves partnership. It's not much, but it's something." He looked at Miguel. "And you baptized Eleanor Bennett. You have those records? At the church, yes. Baptismal records going back 20 years. Good. Colton's jaw set. Then we take what we have and we fight. In court, in front of everyone. We make Silas answer for what he's done. Colton, Marshal Garrett had returned, standing at the edge of the property. I just got word. Judge Harmon is holding a hearing tomorrow. Silas filed a petition for immediate custody. Says you're unfit, can't even protect your own property. He held up a paper, red wax seal. If you don't show up with a defense, he gets the girls. Final ruling. Ruby grabbed Colton's hand, Rose grabbed the other. And in that moment, standing in the ashes of everything he'd built, Colton knew there was only one choice left. Then we show up, he said. And we tell the truth. The courthouse steps were packed by the time they arrived. Half the town had turned out, some curious, some hostile, most just wanting to see how it would end. Colton helped Ruby and Rose down from the wagon, their hands cold in his. They wore the wool dresses Connie had given them, hair braided neatly. They looked smaller than ever. Silas Moreland waited at the top of the steps, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He smiled when he saw them coming. Hayes, his voice carried across the crowd. Glad you could make it. I was worried you might not show. Colton didn't respond. Just walked past him, the girls pressed close to his sides. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and lamp oil. Judge Harmon sat behind the bench, gray-haired and stern-faced. He'd been on the bench for 20 years. Knew every family, every secret, every debt in Salvation Creek. And Silas Moreland had been his poker partner for 10 of those years. All rise, the bailiff called. The room shuffled to its feet. Colton could feel eyes on him, on the girls. Whispers ran through the gallery like wind through dry grass. Judge Harmon banged his gavel. Be seated. We're here to settle the matter of guardianship for Ruby and Rose Bennett, orphaned children of James and Eleanor Bennett. He looked at Colton over his spectacles. Mr. Hayes, you've been housing these children without legal authority for 3 weeks. Mr. Moreland, as their blood uncle, has petitioned for immediate custody. Do you have any reason why I should deny his petition? Colton stood. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Yes, Your Honor, several reasons. Then present them. Father Miguel rose from the front bench. Your Honor, I'm Father Miguel Santos. I've served this territory for 15 years. I baptized Eleanor Bennett in 1879, and I was present when she registered her last will and testament with St. Catherine's Church in 1884. Was present? Judge Harmon leaned forward. Where is this will now? Destroyed, Your Honor. The county clerk's office burned 3 nights ago. All records were lost. A murmur ran through the crowd. Silas's smile never wavered. If there's no will, Judge Harmon said, then I have only Mr. Moreland's guardianship papers, which are legal and binding. But Your Honor, Miguel started. Father, I respect you, but I can't rule on a document that no longer exists, not when Mr. Moreland has a signed decree. The judge looked at Colton. Is that all you have? Colton's throat tightened. He'd known it would come to this, known that without the documents they had nothing but words. But then Connie Blackwell stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, I have this. She walked forward, holding the yellowed invoice. It's a receipt from my store, dated June 1887. It shows James Bennett and Silas Moreland as equal partners in a silver mine, the Bennett-Moreland Mine, Section 14, Range 6. She laid the paper on the judge's bench. Harmon studied it. A partnership. So? So 3 weeks after this purchase, James Bennett filed an amendment with the county. An amendment stating his share would go to his daughters if he died. Connie's voice rang clear. 2 weeks after that, James Bennett fell off a cliff, and Silas claimed full ownership of a mine worth $40,000. The courtroom erupted. Voices overlapping, people standing, the bailiff shouting for order. Silas was on his feet. Your Honor, this is slander. My brother-in-law's death was a tragic accident. There's no evidence of— Sit down, Mr. Moreland. Judge Harmon's voice cracked like a whip. He studied the invoice, then looked at Connie. Do you have proof of this amendment? It was destroyed in the fire, Your Honor, along with everything else. Then I can prove it, Rose said. Her voice was small, but in the sudden silence it carried. Everyone turned to look at her, the 8-year-old girl standing beside Colton's chair, hands clasped in front of her. Judge Harmon's eyebrows rose. Child, this is not— Please, Your Honor. Rose walked forward. Ruby grabbed for her, but Rose kept going, all the way to the bench. I can prove Uncle Silas killed my father. Silas's face went white. Your Honor, The girl is confused. Grief does terrible things to— Let her speak. The judge waved him silent. He looked at Rose. What proof do you have, child? Rose reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a button, brass, stamped with initials. This was Papa's, she said quietly. From his coat. The coat he was wearing when he died. She held it up. But I found this in Uncle Silas's desk drawer, 2 weeks after Papa died. Papa's coat was never found. They said it went over the cliff with him. The courtroom was dead silent. That's ridiculous, Silas said, but his voice had changed. Higher, strained. It's just a button. Could be anyone's. It has Papa's initials, Rose said. J.E.B. James Elias Bennett. And there's blood on it. She turned the button over. Dark stains marked the brass. Judge Harmon took the button carefully, studied it. Then he looked at Silas. Mr. Moreland, do you have an explanation for how your dead brother-in-law's button ended up in your possession? Silas's mouth opened, closed. His face had gone from white to red. It must have been from before, from when he visited. With blood on it? The judge's voice was cold. Marshal Garrett stood up in the back. Your Honor, I'd like to present one more piece of evidence. He walked forward and laid a document on the bench. This is James Bennett's death certificate, filed the day after he died, signed by Doc Harrison as cause of death. But look at the witness signature. Judge Harmon looked. His face went pale. Silas Moreland. The judge read slowly. You witnessed his death? I happened to be nearby. I heard the fall. You told the guardianship court you weren't there, Marshal Garrett said flatly. You said you learned about his death hours later. That's what you testified under oath. I misspoke. I was confused. In this seal, the marshal pointed to the red wax at the bottom of the death certificate. That's your seal, isn't it? The same one you use on all your bank documents? Silas stared at the certificate, at the seal he'd pressed into the wax himself. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom saw it. The guilt, the fear, the calculation of a man realizing his carefully built lies were crumbling. You were there, Ruby said, standing now. Her voice shook, but she kept going. You pushed him, and then you made it look like an accident. That's absurd, Silas turned to Judge Harmon. Your Honor, these are desperate accusations from desperate people. There's no proof. There's enough. Judge Harmon's voice was ice. There's testimony. There's a button from a dead man's coat in your possession. There's a partnership dissolved under suspicious circumstances. And there's your own signature on a death certificate, contradicting your sworn testimony. He banged his gavel once. Marshal Garrett, arrest Silas Moreland on suspicion of fraud, perjury, and murder. Hold him for trial. The courtroom exploded. Silas lunged for the door, but Garrett was already moving. He grabbed Silas's arm and yanked it behind his back. The banker struggled, but the marshal was stronger. You can't do this, Slush shouted. I have rights. I have lawyers. You have the right to stay silent, Garrett said grimly. I suggest you use it. Use. As they dragged Silas away, still shouting, Rose ran to Colton. She buried her face in his shirt, shoulders shaking. Ruby followed, wrapping her arms around both of them. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. Mr. Hayes, given the circumstances and pending investigation into Mr. Moreland's actions, I'm granting you temporary guardianship of Ruby and Rose Bennett. We'll make it permanent once this matter is fully resolved. He banged his gavel again. Court adjourned. The sound echoed through the courthouse like thunder. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory. The mud dried first, turning from soup to hard-packed earth. Then the grass, pushing up in green shoots between the scorched timbers where the barn had stood. By late April, wildflowers dotted the fields, Indian paintbrush and lupine, bright against the brown. Colton stood in the yard, watching Ruby and Rose walk the fence line. They moved with purpose now, checking posts, calling out when they found one that needed mending. Ranch work, the kind of work that made a person belong to a place. Behind him, the sound of hammers. Tom Wheeler and a dozen other men from town raising the frame of a new barn. They'd shown up 3 days ago without asking, just brought timber and nails and got to work. Least we can do, Tom had said, not meeting Colton's eyes. After everything. Connie appeared beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been inside making lunch for the work crew, bread and stew, the smell drifting through the open windows. Judge Harmon made it official this morning, she said quietly. Full guardianship. Permanent. Ruby and Rose are yours. Colton felt something loosen in his chest, something he'd been holding tight for 2 months. And Silas? Trial's set for June. Marshal found 3 witnesses who saw him on that cliff the day James died, and the assayer confirmed the mine's worth $42,000. Connie's jaw tightened. He killed a man for money. He'll hang for it. Colton didn't feel satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness. The mine, he said. The girls inherit? Half of it. Other half goes to James's estate, which means them anyway. Connie smiled slightly. Judge put it in trust until they're 18, but he's releasing $10,000 now for ranch improvements in their education. You'll be able to pay off the mortgage, fix this place up proper. It's their money. It's their future. And you're part of that now. She squeezed his arm. They're lucky to have you, Colton. He wasn't sure about that, but he knew he was lucky to have them. The girls came running across the field, boots kicking up dust. Rose reached him first, breathless. Papa Colton! She'd started calling him that 2 weeks ago. It still made his throat tight every time. The fence by the creek. There's a calf stuck in the mud. We need help. Show me. He grabbed a rope from the porch and followed them. Papa Colton, not just Mr. Hayes anymore. Papa, Catherine would have liked that. That evening, after the work crew had gone home and the sun was setting orange and gold over the mountains, Colton walked to the small grove behind the house. 2 graves rested there under the oak tree. Catherine's marker, carved with her name and dates. Beside it, a smaller stone. Too small. The baby who'd lived 6 hours and then slipped away. Colton knelt between them. The grass was green here, soft. I know I ain't been around much, he said quietly. Been angry, I guess. At you for leaving, at God for taking you, at myself for not saving you. The wind sighed through the oak leaves. But I got something to tell you. He ran his hand over Catherine's marker. There's 2 little girls living in our house now, Ruby and Rose. 8 years old. They lost their mama too, and their papa. They were alone and scared and hungry. His voice caught. I couldn't save you, Catherine. Couldn't save our boy, but I saved them, and maybe... He stopped, swallowed hard. Maybe that's what you'd want, for all this grief to mean something, for it to make room for more love instead of just more emptiness. He stood slowly, knees aching from the cold ground. I ain't forgetting you, either of you, but I'm living again, and I hope that's okay. No answer came, just the wind and the evening birds singing. But when Colton walked back to the house, he felt lighter than he had in 5 years. Inside, Ruby was setting the table. Rose was reading aloud from one of the books Sarah Chen had given her, stumbling over the bigger words but determined. They looked up when he came in. Papa Colton, Ruby said, tomorrow's May 1st. Rose and I were thinking, maybe we should do the ice breaking, even though it's not frozen anymore, just as a habit. Colton smiled. Ice don't break itself. You gotta show up every day. That's what you always say, Rose said, grinning. Because it's true. He hung his hat on the peg by the door, and, yeah, tomorrow morning, first thing, all 3 of us. After supper, after dishes were washed and the fire banked for the night, they sat together on the porch. The stars were coming out, bright and sharp in the clear spring air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Ruby leaned against Colton's shoulder. Rose had her head in his lap, half asleep. Papa Colton? Ruby's voice was soft. Do you think Mama and Papa are watching us? From heaven? I reckon so. Do you think they're happy that we're here with you? Colton looked up at the stars, at the vast Wyoming sky, dark and endless and full of light. Yeah, honey, I think they're happy. Rose's breathing had evened out, asleep. Ruby wasn't far behind. Colton sat there with both girls drowsing against him, listening to the night sounds, the creek running nearby, the horses shifting in the corral, the wind through new grass. 5 years ago, he'd lost everything. But sitting here now, with 2 small bodies warm and safe beside him, Colton realized something. He'd found everything too, just in a different shape than he'd expected. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of spring flowers and rain still weeks away. Tomorrow they'd break ice that wasn't there. Just to remember, just to show up, because that's what family does. Now folks ask me, what made a man risk everything for 2 girls he barely knew? I reckon the answer ain't complicated. It's just hard. See, Colton Hayes had lost a wife and a baby 5 years before those twins stumbled into his barn. Thought his heart was dead as winter ground. Thought the best thing he could do was keep his head down, work his land, and wait for his own time to come. But grief don't kill you. It just makes room for more love, if you're brave enough to let it in, Room for more family, even when it don't look like the family you planned. Ice don't break itself. You got to show up every day, no matter how cold it gets. That's what he taught those girls, and maybe that's what they taught him right back. As for Silas Moreland, well, he hanged that June. Judge said a man who'd kill for money ain't fit to walk among decent folks. The mine went to Ruby and Rose, held in trust like it should have been all along. They used some of that money to build the finest barn in 3 counties. Rest went into the bank for their futures. Ruby became a teacher, like Sarah Chin. Rose married a rancher, 2 valleys over, raised 4 children who all learned to break ice before they could write their names. And Colton Hayes, he lived to see grandchildren, lived to see that ranch bloom into something Catherine would have been proud of, lived to die in his own bed at 73, surrounded by people who loved him. They buried him next to Catherine and the baby under that old oak tree. And on his marker, Ruby and Rose carved 6 words that said everything. He showed up every single day. Some folks say blood makes family. I reckon blood just makes kin. Family is who you'd walk through a blizzard for, who you'd lose everything to protect, who you'd break ice with every morning, just because it matters. That's the truth of it. And the truth don't need dressing up.